And welcome to the Frederick Democrats videocast. I'm your host, Josh Kramer, and with me today is Lois Jarman, who is a member of the Frederick County Board of Education, and she is running to be elected to a full term. She was appointed a couple years ago, I believe, after
January of 2019.
Yeah, it was following in 2018. Then board member Ken Kerr had won a seat to be in the Maryland House of Delegates, and Lois Jarman was appointed to fill that vacancy. So now she's running for a full term, and we're all very excited about it. So first thing that I wanted to ask you about are your priorities. You know, what do you think are going to be the absolute most important things that you want to get done if you've got a full 4-year term?
So, and this, I think this is a big topic. The social emotional learning, the meeting the needs of the whole student. And now that we're in the midst of COVID, that becomes increasingly more essential. In my research for my doctoral program, I did a lot of work on brain-based learning and what happens to the brain. And we've learned a lot now about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and the actual physical response of the brain to those experiences. We know so much about the brain now because of medical technology that enables us to do MRIs, EEGs, to look at how that brain is functioning under certain situations in certain settings. And so we know more about how the brain learns. And we know that certain chemicals in the brain, and when I'm teaching classes about this topic, you know, I talk about cortisol, and there is chronic cortisol. There have been studies to suggest that chronic cortisol actually has long-term effects on the brain. And so cortisol is really negative in terms of learning. And so we want to do what we can in our classrooms to minimize the presence of that chemical in the brain. And so I think that leads to a new approach to instruction and how important relationships become. I heard this statement in a workshop or something, and the statement was relationships before everything else, context before content, and Maslow before, oh my, it just went out of my brain. Maslow's hierarchy.
Yeah, the hierarchy of needs. Before, not Bloom's, right?
Yes, Bloom's taxonomy.
Bloom's taxonomy.
Gosh, talk about the brain. I'm going to be 60, so. So we've got to look at those physical needs, the needs of being fed, the needs of feeling safe, the needs of having a classroom. And yes, we're in a situation right now where that's really stressful. And
well, that kind of is a great segue into the next thing that I wanted to ask you about, which is the reopening of Frederick County Public Schools for in-person classes. And you know, right now there's since March we've been in this virtual learning, and certainly there's differing views on it. I think everybody, or at least most everybody, agrees that in-person learning is best. However, given the current situation, you know, I would say you all on the Board of Ed have done the right thing in trying to make sure that that the students at FCPS and the members of the staff are safe. And yeah, so as far as reopening safely, what do you think that looks like?
So we had a board meeting Wednesday night, September the 8th, and, or was it the 9th? It was the 9th, September the 9th. And we are gradually opening up. So since August 31st, some of our students who do not have internet access in their homes, do not have computers, we've been bringing those students into the building since August 30th. And they're in the media centers, they're in computer labs where they have internet and computer accessibility. They're being supervised by staff. They're in that online learning setting, but they're doing that within the physical building. Beginning next week, we're going to be bringing small groups of English language learners in, small groups of special education students. So we're beginning to bring small groups in. And I think that right now, once that occurs, we need to look at how that works. And we're bringing in staff right now on a voluntary basis. So the staff members who are coming in are willing to do so. We have some staff members who have been going into the classroom to do teaching from their classrooms. And if you think about, chemistry and biology, and to be able to have the lab and to be able to have that set up, and now, when we did the continuation of learning in the spring, we weren't sure about safety in terms of students meeting synchronously with instructors. There were a lot of we didn't know, and so that has been resolved. Students and teachers are meeting synchronously. They're meeting face-to-face via a platform similar to this through Schoology. And so that has improved, and some teachers have opted to be in the classroom to do that instruction. They have all of their tools there. I can tell you that some of the creativity of the teachers in their presentations has been phenomenal. And we're all going through the same emotional stress, the same physical stress, the same concerns about loved ones being ill, the same concerns about potential contraction of the disease. And one of the things, as I talk to people, I have been saying, they don't call it the novel coronavirus for the heck of it.
Yeah.
There's a reason. We don't know. And the more, I was just watching, before we came on, I was watching a news report about the cardiovascular effects of this disease. And so even those who, get rid of COVID, who have gone through it, we don't know what the long-term effects are. And I, as an individual, am not willing to risk putting anybody in a setting where we increase the likelihood of the contraction of this virus. And so I felt extremely comfortable with the board's decision. I like the fact that we are gradually going back into this. We recognize the needs of preschool students and kindergartners and first graders to be face-to-face. Yes, we recognize that, but I don't want to do it until we know that it's going to work.
Yeah, and to that point, we have been seeing some cases where I've seen some reports of people catching it twice, and these very scary reports about even people who had quote unquote mild cases of it having cardiovascular lung issues, and we don't know yet if those are going to be long term.
A colleague of my son-in-law lost 20% of his lung function, and they don't think he'll ever regain it.
It's so, and when we start talking about, staff members, because, there's been some debate about kids and how, the kind of cases they're getting versus adults. And, I just think those staff members, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s,
staff members who have parents who are living with them,
yeah.
Staff members who have spouses who have health concerns. There's so much to consider, and we've gotten so many letters from parents and I understand the needs, but we have to look at, as a board, we have to look at the needs of almost 45,000 students
Mm-hmm.
and 6,000 staff members. So we're talking over 50,000 people.
Yeah.
We have to consider the impact of this on all of them.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it's doing, just doing what's right, not always what's popular, I guess. And
And
yeah.
doing what we think is safest.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that's come up a few weeks ago, I read in the Frederick News Post that the Frederick County Public Schools bus drivers and cafeteria staff were being let go because there's no work for them to do right now. So my question with that, since that this decision has been made in regards to when the schools reopen, and uh, rehiring the force, building up that force of drivers and cafeteria staff and so forth. What does that look like? And is there any kind of priority process for people who had been employed by the school system?
Absolutely, absolutely. So we talked about this at the board meeting as well on Wednesday. It was roughly 500 people. And I can tell you, Josh, that again, this year on the board, yes, I've been on the board for a year and a half now, but I can tell you this, since January of 2020, it has been one of the most difficult years of my life in terms of making these decisions, knowing what the impact of those decisions are. We will be bringing, as we bring these small groups back, we need bus transportation, we need meal service. So we are going to, even though we said it was this number, we're bringing it down as we bring those students back. And so we're hopeful that that 500 number is going to be smaller, but we don't know yet. We didn't, when we made that decision, we didn't know how many students were going to be coming back. We didn't know how many teachers were going to be willing to come back. We didn't know what that was going to look like. Yeah. So we announced worst case scenario. Mm-hmm. And so we're looking at that. Our hope is, the reason we wanted, it was, if we furloughed, then there was no possibility for unemployment benefits. Yeah. And so that weighed into the decision. I know how important healthcare is, especially now, and I know how expensive healthcare is. And so we agreed unanimously to fund the insurance for all of those employees so that there is at least medical. Yeah. In making this very difficult decision, and in doing what was not anything anybody wanted to do, yeah. We tried to be as helpful as we could. Mm-hmm. And I am hopeful that, as we talk about delivering meals, because we are responsible for breakfast and lunch for many of our students. And so what does that look like? And staff is determining, where those meals are, where and how those meals are going to be prepared and then delivered, and what does that look like? So we made a decision, and again, that decision, the announcement was worst case scenario. Mm-hmm. And now we're hoping that it's not that as bad an impact.
Yeah. Well, I hadn't really planned on asking this, but real quickly, if things do get worse, like I keep seeing all these things about, we're anticipating with flu season. And one of the things, I saw a report that was talking about one of the reasons why the flu spread so much and I know I'm talking about the flu right now and not coronavirus, but one of the reasons why the flu spreads so much during the winter is because more people are indoors and they're in closer proximity to one another. I can't imagine it's going to be different with this virus, especially since it is respiratory. It's through droplets in the air from people's breath. So, if we go into November, December, and we're seeing, the positivity rate go up, the caseload for our hospitals go up, and even just the infection rate, the raw number of cases go up. What are your thoughts there in terms of, the reopening and the rehiring of these employees?
We're just going to have to backtrack. Before we got on, I was watching an announcement up by Dr. Fauci, and that was exactly one of the things that he said. He said, as right now, because of the weather, things can be outside, but as soon as we revert to more indoors, there are going to be increases.
Yeah. And, it's not necessarily a topic for you and I to get into tonight, but, I also keep thinking about like the restaurants and everything. You think of places like downtown Frederick and the restaurant industry and how, razor thin margins in that industry as it is.
I know.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, and it's a reality for everybody, because once things have to go back in, and Dr. Fauci was talking about the flu and how the flu spreads.
Yeah.
We're indoors, and yes, COVID will do the exact same thing. So I think that we are in an ever, reevaluate. But at least for a bit, if we can get some into face-to-face, and it was funny because I think it was in one of the letters that we received for public comment, was somebody who talked about the clamshell. And, we open and then we close and we open.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm afraid that that's what we might really be looking at with this thing. Dr. Fauci was saying this evening that, we realistically can't expect a return to normal, to pre-COVID normal, until mid to end of 2021.
Yeah, I keep hearing these things about, a vaccine and the possibility of a vaccine being ready by November. But I also keep thinking about, even if that happens, we've still got, it's got to be produced, manufactured in massive numbers, and it's got to be deployed. And then so there's going to be a group of people that get it first, hopefully first responders and essential workers, and then, others who are
people who will feel safe getting it.
Well, and that's another factor, of course. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, wanted to change gears a bit here, because one of the other major issues gaining national attention, and of course locally, this has been a big issue as well, is on the promotion of racial justice.
Mm-hmm.
And do you feel like Frederick County Public Schools are doing enough? Do you think that the school system could be doing more? And what would you like to see in a full term? Or like, what would you like to do in a full term?
So we've gotten the data back. We know that our African American males have a higher suspension rate than any grouping of students in our school system. We have to work on that. I am putting a lot of faith in Jay Mason, who is chairing our racial equity committee. It took a while for the committee to get up because we had to develop the policy, we had to select the committee. I think one of the things is, when you're running for public office, you think, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And then you get into the setting, and Karen Yoho said it the other night at our meeting. She said, when you're a candidate, you have all of these grandiose ideas of things that you're going to do and how you're going to change the world. And then you get into the reality of the setting and how procedure works. And, we operate under this Open Meetings Act for transparency, so that the public knows what we're doing and that the public has input. But that in itself slows the process down. And we wanted transparency with the selection of the members of this committee, with the development of the policy that regulates this committee. And now so that took a year.
Yeah.
And now they are finally in a point where they are meeting regularly. And so there's light at the end of the tunnel. I think that progress will be made. Progress is slow when you're working in an organization, but I am hopeful that the committee, we back and forth with the selection. This board took the selection of the members of that committee so seriously, and how we went through every application and read every single one, and the careful selection and the hopes that the members of that committee will help the school system to do what is best for our Black students, for our African American students, and for our staff members. One of the things is, are we hiring enough? And I know what it feels like to have that person that looks like you in a position of authority, in a position of leadership. What does that look like?
Yeah.
And so for me, I went to a women's college, and so all of the campus leaders were women. And so I was able to see myself in every leader. So how do we do that? I think that, and I had this discussion with Terrell Thrasher, one of the things that we have to overcome as a society is the negative view of our education professionals.
Yeah.
Because why does any high school student say, I want to go into education. I can't wait to be a teacher so that society can demean me and that I can spend all of my hard-earned money on classroom supplies because there's no funds for them, or I'm going to lie in bed awake at night worrying about if my students are getting food, if my students are being physically abused. Gee, this is a great profession. And then to be beat up in public forums because teachers aren't doing enough.
Yeah.
You convince high school students that education is a noble profession. I researched the Finnish model of schools, and teachers are among their most honored, most valued professionals. That's not the case in the United States.
Yeah.
And we were talking at length about the graduating class of Morgan State University, an HBCU, historically Black university, college or university. Morgan State is one. Morgan State had 4 education majors graduate.
Yeah, a lot of colleges and universities are just outright getting rid of their education departments. There's not enough people that want to go into the profession, which is scary.
It's scary. So we have a teacher shortage. Teacher shortage. And then to say we want teachers of color, that's even more difficult. So what we need to create is a climate that respects education as a profession. So I would say whoever the next president of the United States is, we need an educator as the Secretary of Education.
Yeah.
We need educators. When Microsoft's Bill Gates started the whole core curriculum, they didn't put educators on that committee to plan that curriculum. They put business people.
Yeah.
And when you make policy decisions about education and you don't include educators, you demean the profession from the top down.
Yeah. And one of the problems that I always saw, when I was teaching with dealing with the state standards and so forth, was the focus on getting everybody to a certain level. And that kind of put you in a box, because when you had, kids that were doing pretty well, and then you said, well, I've gotten you where you need to be, so I don't have to focus on you anymore. I have to focus on these kids. And it can be a disservice, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
You want
Absolutely.
every kid to thrive and to meet their maximum potential.
Mm-hmm.
And, it certainly, I think some teachers on those, and this is one of the things I've always admired about you, is you're a board member, but you're still in the classroom.
I am. And when you put businessmen creating core curriculum, all they really did was take first grade standards and bump them down to kindergarten.
Yeah.
But they didn't recognize cognitive ability.
Yeah.
So if the brain can't process those things because the brain is not developed to process,
yeah,
you have to teach the skill. So teaching to the test became a necessity because you had policy that was not developed by people who know education, by people who know cognitive development of the brain.
Yeah.
And so it was set up to fail.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fail our students, fail our teachers, fail our society.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and I personally recall like going into a class and saying like, I got to get them to do this. Like their brains aren't developed yet to do.
They're not there.
So, well, one last issue I wanted to go over with you and kind of get your thoughts on is that of the SROs, the school resource officers, because they've come up a lot, and especially in terms of the racial justice stuff. You just noted that we're seeing Black boys are the ones who are being suspended more than any other demographic. I don't personally know what the numbers look like in terms of, say, charges that are brought against students in schools, but frankly, it wouldn't surprise me to see similar things. That any student charged is more likely to be African American or Latino. But there have been calls for reforming SROs and their role. The idea was, especially after Columbine, they were put into schools, and then when things like the Parkland shooting happened, and there was a whole question about the SRO there not going and trying to stop the shooter. Like he had a handgun, and these shooters are coming in with AR-15s. Like the SROs don't stand a chance.
And I love all the security members that we have in the vestibules that are all made of glass.
Yeah.
If a shooter's bringing an AK or a whatever they are, and you got a whole front of the building that's glass, hello, it's gone. It doesn't matter about the little buzzer.
Yeah, they're not going to buzz themselves in.
Hello, just blow it all down, right? I mean, so I think it was best effort, but when you look at the buzzer and the swipe card and all of that, that's in front of the whole glass. Yeah.
Yeah. But so there's been those calls to reform their duties, but because they seem to be limited in their ability to actually handle a school shooter. There have been some calls to completely eliminate them because it's been too many unintended consequences, and it hasn't worked out the way that I think some people had hoped. However, there's another view, and I think I saw a letter to the editor. I don't really think I agreed with the person completely, but they made a good point in that, saying like, the idea was it was about community policing, that having the SROs in the building, in the schools, was a good way to have students interact with police officers and police officers to get to know the people in the community. So I wanted to get your take on the role of SROs and where you see them going, or and more specifically, what you'd like to see the role of SROs be in the future.
So I think a lot of that has to do with how we as a society are looking at the role of police in general. And I would like us to have our SROs take a look not at what the behavior was, but why the behavior. And I think if we look at why the behavior, we come to a better understanding of how we fix that. And you know, as we look at what happened with George Floyd, as we look at what has happened to so many, we are looking at what the behavior was, and we're not even necessarily what the behavior was, but who the behavior was. And I think that we have to look at the why. And the why requires us to spend time on that, getting to know that relationship.
Yeah.
And it all boils down to that. So if all of our staff members are looking at the relationships, not the behaviors, but the relationships with our students, and understanding that, you know, I have said this repeatedly, and Josh, I know you spent years in the classroom as well. When I know what a lot of the students go home to at night,
yeah,
I am forever amazed at the strength of my students. I don't know that in a lot of the settings that they go home to that I could.
Yeah.
And what does that chronic stress, that chronic fear, that chronic whatever that emotion is, what does that do to the brain? And until we get to know our students and can understand what they are going home to. So it all boils down to, I'm not against SROs. If SROs are about building relationships, we know who, you know, we have school support staff members at every school.
Yeah.
And so they know who our poverty students are. In many instances, they know who our abused students are. If we spent time getting to know those students and becoming the caring, welcoming place that those students need, we change the dynamic of much in our society.
Yeah.
And I had a discussion with Carl Bickle about this, that it's really not about the discipline. It's about understanding the why of the behavior and getting to the root of that, and changing it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that can be very effective. You know, as a teacher, you know, you have that student that struggles, that, you know, beginning of the year, you're like, God, this kid is a pain. But then you
find out and they were the kids that I always went to the school support person and said, tell me about this one.
Yep.
What's going on? And then as soon as you know that, and you pull the kid aside and you say, hey, I'm here. You want to come at lunch? You want to, you know, I don't know about you, my classroom door was always open at lunch.
Yeah.
I got to school a half hour before the bell rang just because I kept my door open.
Yep.
Kids came in for stuff to eat. Kids came in to talk. I had a number of LGBTQ kids come in and come out to me because they needed somebody to talk to.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what our schools need to be. And that puts an increase on the demand of teachers. But you can't teach that brain until that brain feels safe and that brain feels comfortable.
Yeah.
And so it is time well invested, and it makes our society a better place.
Absolutely.
This is what education is all about. That's why the founding fathers wanted a public education system, to have a, you know, an elevated,
well-educated citizenry.
There you go. You took the words right out of my mouth.
Yeah. Jefferson said,
There you go.
yeah, inform and educate the masses, for they are the only sure reliance of the preservation of our democracy. So,
And there you go.
yeah.
And there you go. And that's what we need to do. And we need to educate students to critically think, not to multiple guess. We need to develop students who can communicate in their language, both orally and written, and written both orally and written, and not be able to guess the right answer on an exam. And so if I had my druthers, I'd rather we not have standardized testing. We don't have standardized people.
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, with that,
Thank you,
Lois Jarman, for coming on to the video cast, and I'll have this up shortly.
Okay.
Very much appreciate it, and good luck to you in your in your bid for full term on the Board of Education.
Thank you much, sir.
All right.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.